This is a story that sounds like the script of a horror movie, but everything you are about to hear actually happened. A small American town, a young woman, a casual match on Tinder, just a few messages, one date, and she disappears forever. When police finally discovered her body, it became clear this wasn't an ordinary murder. Behind it stood a man obsessed with vampire fantasies, convinced that blood and death were part of a ritual. At his side, a young woman, his girlfriend and partner in crime, who willingly joined the game that turned into torture and death for an innocent victim. At the center of it all were Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell, a strange and deadly duo who hunted young women online. Their plans sounded absurd, their words like delusion, but the consequences were terrifyingly real. This case became one of the most chilling trials in recent American history, and although it never reached the notoriety of famous serial killer cases, for those who followed the investigation it served as a cold reminder: evil can hide even in the places where we feel safe: dating apps, casual chats, and so-called friends online. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to go back to the beginning, to the biography of the man at the heart of it. Aubrey Trail was born in Nebraska, and from an early age he showed no regard for rules. His life became a chain of scams, frauds, and clashes with the law. He sold counterfeit coins, tricked people at auctions, forged documents. He wasn't a criminal mastermind, more like a petty conman who knew how to gain people's trust. But behind that mask was someone harboring much darker fantasies. By the age of 50, Trail looked like a classic criminal out of the newspapers, a big, heavy-set man with a hardened face. But his real weapon was charisma, the ability to talk, to convince, to dominate. He could make vulnerable people believe that he had power, secret knowledge, that he was different. That mix, petty crime and a pathological hunger for control, made him dangerous. On the other side was Bailey Boswell, just 23 years old, young, attractive, once a normal small-town girl who had played on her high school basketball team. No one who knew her back then could have imagined that only a few years later she would be called an accomplice in a brutal murder. As so often happens in these stories, she found herself pulled into the orbit of a man who offered not only love, but also a new and dangerous lifestyle. Trail's influence proved stronger than logic. She joined him in his scams, and eventually in his darkest fantasies. To this day, people argue, was she a victim of manipulation or a willing participant? But one thing is certain, together they formed a deadly pair. Their bond was not just romantic. Together they began to build something resembling a small cult. Aubrey Trail claimed he was a witch, that blood and death gave him power. He insisted that in order to become real, one had to kill. His words may have sounded like delusions, but for the young women lured by promises of gifts, money, or adventure, it became a trap. Over time, Trail and Boswell gathered a circle of young women around them. These women were pushed into sexual rituals, humiliation, control. It was all held together by promises of rewards, easy money, as well as threats and psychological pressure. But behind the games of witchcraft and rituals, there was something more sinister: the hunt. A hunt for those who could be used, broken, and destroyed. In 2017, their path crossed with a young woman for whom a simple Tinder date became fatal. Her name was Sydney Loofe, and her story would become the tragic centerpiece of this case. For Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell, the internet wasn't just entertainment, it was their hunting ground. Apps like Tinder and platforms like Facebook gave them exactly what they needed: access. Access to strangers, to vulnerable young women, to people who thought they were just having casual conversations online. Their favorite disguise was a fake identity, a woman named Audrey. Through that mask, they reached out with friendly, even playful messages. On the surface, it looked harmless, a little awkward, a little flirtatious, nothing alarming. But underneath was something calculated, a strategy to find those who were lonely, insecure, or searching for attention. And Trail knew exactly how to read people. He could tell when someone needed validation. He could sense when someone wanted adventure. To those people, Audrey wasn't just a stranger online. She was a chance to feel special. That's how the trap was set. But there was another layer, one that outsiders would find almost laughable if it weren't so deadly. Trail wasn't just scamming people for money. He was obsessed with something darker: vampires, witchcraft, rituals. He claimed to be a witch. He told people that killing was the path to real power. He even insisted that drinking blood or causing pain gave strength. Most rational people would roll their eyes at such nonsense, but in Trail's twisted mind, these weren't stories. They were rules to live and to kill by. The frightening part wasn't just his belief, it was his determination to make others believe too. For the women he and Boswell pulled into their circle, this meant ritualistic acts that mixed sex, humiliation, and fear. For him, it was proof that he could dominate them, proof that his fantasies had weight in the real world. And then there was Bailey Boswell. She wasn't just a bystander, she was the perfect cover. Young, attractive, approachable. She disarmed suspicion simply by being there. A middle-aged man ranting about witchcraft might scare people off, but a smiling 23-year-old woman offering friendship or a date, that felt safe. Her presence was the bait. When Bailey invited someone to hang out, it seemed normal. When she talked about easy money or new experiences, it seemed genuine. Trail knew this, and he relied on her. Without Bailey, the scheme might have collapsed. With her, it flourished. Over time, a small group of young women drifted into their orbit. Some wanted money, some were curious, some were pressured, but the pattern was always the same. Promises first, control second, threats last. Trail demanded loyalty the way a cult leader does, absolute and unquestioning. Those who resisted were intimidated. Those who stayed were rewarded with gifts, clothes, even drugs. It was a toxic cycle, reward and punishment, fear and dependency. It might sound bizarre that anyone could believe him, but that's how cults work. The fantasy is ridiculous from the outside, but inside the pressure cooker of manipulation and fear, it feels real. And for Trail, the fantasy wasn't enough. He wasn't satisfied with obedience, he wanted blood. By late 2017, Trail's obsession had hardened into a goal. He told people, openly in fact, that killing was inevitable, that one day he would need to take a life to prove his power. Some who heard him thought he was bluffing, just talking big, but others noticed something unsettling. He meant it, so the hunt began. Trail and Boswell weren't just looking for followers anymore, they were looking for prey, someone they could lure in, someone they could control, someone who wouldn't come back out. And on Tinder, they found her. Her name was Sydney Loofe. Sydney Irene Loofe was 24 years old. To those who knew her, she was kind, bright, and a little shy. She worked at a home improvement store in Lincoln, Nebraska, and like many young people, she used dating apps to meet new people. Her friends described her as genuine, someone who cared deeply about others, even if she sometimes struggled to find her own place in the world. Sydney wasn't reckless. She wasn't chasing danger. She was simply looking for connection, something that in today's world so often begins with a swipe on a screen. But in November 2017, that innocent search would lead her into the orbit of Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell. And from there, her life would spiral into darkness. Through Tinder, Sydney matched with Bailey. The profile seemed safe, even fun. Bailey looked young, approachable, someone who could be trusted. They chatted, made plans, and soon arranged to meet. On November 14th, Sydney went on a first date with Bailey. It went well enough that the two agreed to see each other again the very next night. Sydney was excited. She even shared her anticipation with friends on Snapchat, posting a message that read, "Ready for my date." It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening, dinner, conversation, maybe the start of something new. But for Sydney, this would be her final post. When Sydney failed to show up for work the next day, alarms began to ring. She wasn't the type to disappear without telling anyone. She was close to her parents, always in touch with friends. Silence from Sydney was unusual and deeply worrying. Her friends tried calling, no response. Text messages went unanswered. By November 16th, her family officially reported her missing. For the people who loved her, fear set in quickly. Something wasn't right. And as days passed without a word, that fear hardened into dread. Authorities launched a search. They traced Sydney's phone records, her last known locations, and her social media activity. The last clear sign of her was that Tinder date. And soon, investigators discovered who she had gone out with, Bailey Boswell. That lead opened a door. Behind it was not just Bailey, but also the older man she lived with, Aubrey Trail. When police first questioned the pair, their answers raised more questions than they solved. Bailey insisted the date had gone fine, that Sydney was alive when she last saw her. Aubrey, on the other hand, gave bizarre explanations, rambling about witchcraft, about powers, about loyalty. It was incoherent, but one thing was clear. They knew more than they were saying. What really happened on the night of November 15th would only come out later, in fragments, in confessions, testimonies, and evidence pieced together by investigators. Sydney had been lured under the promise of a second date, but instead of a night of laughter and connection, she walked into a trap. Somewhere inside that small Nebraska home, Aubrey Trail's dark fantasies became reality. Sydney became the proof he had promised his followers, the sacrifice he claimed would give him power. The details that surfaced later were horrific: rituals of control, cruelty, and finally, death. In the days after Sydney vanished, Bailey and Aubrey behaved strangely. They recorded videos, posting rambling monologues online where Trail claimed responsibility, yet spoke in riddles about witches and loyalty. He seemed to enjoy the spotlight, even as investigators closed in. Meanwhile, Sydney's family and friends clung to hope. Her face appeared on missing person posters. Her story spread through the community. But deep down, many feared the truth, that she would never come home. That fear was confirmed on December 4, 2017. After weeks of searching, investigators found black trash bags scattered across rural Clay County, Nebraska. Inside were dismembered human remains. DNA tests would later confirm what everyone already suspected: it was Sydney. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was a murder, calculated, cruel, and ritualistic, and all eyes turned back to the couple who had lured her in. When investigators finally pieced it all together, the reality was worse than anyone wanted to believe. Sydney Loofe had not simply vanished. She had been murdered, dismembered, and left in garbage bags tossed along back roads in rural Nebraska. The sheer coldness of it stunned even seasoned detectives. And then came the footage, surveillance video from a local Home Depot. Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell strolling the aisles like any ordinary couple. They picked up saws, garbage bags, bottles of bleach. Nothing rushed, nothing panicked, just another shopping trip, at least to anyone watching in the store. But investigators knew exactly what those items would be used for, and that knowledge made the footage unbearable to watch. What chilled people most was the contrast. Sydney was a daughter, a friend, a young woman who loved animals and music, and her killers treated her as though she were disposable. A human life reduced to a ritual in Aubrey Trail's twisted fantasy. The trial itself felt surreal. Trail, always theatrical, once even cut his own throat right there in the courtroom. He survived, but the gesture said everything about him: manipulative, desperate for control, determined to shock. Jurors weren't swayed. If anything, the act confirmed just how unstable and dangerous he was. Witness after witness described a strange cult-like world, Trail talking about vampire beliefs, promising power, insisting that killing was a step toward becoming a true witch. Some young women had been pulled into his orbit, some manipulated, others simply afraid. Boswell, barely in her 20s, stood by him throughout. Her role blurred between follower and accomplice, but facts cut through the theatrics. Sydney's Tinder connection to Boswell, the digital trail, the timeline that matched perfectly, the evidence of what they bought, where they went, what they said. Piece by piece, the case locked into place. When the verdict came down, it was heavy. Aubrey Trail was sentenced to death. Bailey Boswell, life without parole, the first woman in Nebraska to receive that punishment. The courtroom was silent, almost suffocating, when the judge read it out. For Sydney's family, though, no verdict could repair what had been taken. Her parents described a hole in their lives that would never close. Friends remembered her laughter, her kindness, the way she lit up ordinary days. And now, those memories were all that remained. This case lingers because it's not just about two killers. It's about the vulnerability of trust in the digital age. Sydney thought she was meeting someone kind, someone real. Instead, she stepped straight into the path of predators who had perfected their mask. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Not the blood or the courtroom drama, but the ordinariness of evil. People who can walk into a hardware store, smile at the cashier, pay for bleach and rope like it's nothing, all while planning something unspeakable. Sydney's story will always be a tragedy, but it is also a warning, a reminder that behind the glow of a phone screen, behind a simple swipe or friendly chat, danger can wait, and it's a danger we can't afford to forget.